Hi, I'm Jessica George, and this is my SIOP folder video. The SIOP model of sheltered instruction is meant to help ELLs and really just all students better understand your lessons. You're designing lessons to help kids better understand your content through a variety of different methods. So the first one I'd like to talk about here is lesson preparation, and these are all the things that I've got on my lesson preparation. There's this section here says how to start an objective. This is really important because it gives you ideas on how to display a student-friendly objective, and there's also some really helpful tips in here to help you remember how to write an objective and present them. This one right here helps you, it reminds you that you need to explain, model, and review verbs. All the verbs are listed under here. That's really important to do for your kids. It's a great list that you can use to refer back to when you're trying to write your objective. These cutouts here, they are labels that represent meaningful activities that you can integrate into your lessons. So when you're planning, when you're preparing your lesson, you can have these in mind as things you can do. This part is really important. It's a checklist of what needs to be considered when you're implementing a content and language objective in your lesson. Like, you can literally go down this list and check off whether or not you have these things in your lesson. And if you don't, then you can go back and add them. The next one I want to talk about over here is the second SIOP indicator, which is building background knowledge. So there's a bridge here. The bridge represents how the ELL and ESL teacher needs to explicitly connect these students' prior knowledge and backgrounds to new content and language concepts. That's really important to do for all of your kids, but especially for the ELL kids. How you make these connections is really, really important. You can use graphic organizers or class notes or a PowerPoint slide. These are questions, kind of question stems to help you activate prior knowledge. If you're trying to decide, like, okay, well, how can I do that in my lesson? These are question stems to help connect to new content. So it'll help you relate to what they've learned before, what you've talked about before. It's really important to do that so that you can make those connections, because that's how these kids are going to get the concepts, by making connections and making the content meaningful to them somehow. This part right here, this is just helpful hints in developing academic vocabulary with your students. This is just really important for you to be able to be active in developing and understanding the words and the ways to learn them. A lot of ELLs struggle with this, so this is one of the most important things for you to do. This is a little flip book, and it provides some strategies that you can use when building background with your kids. There's all kinds of things you can do: word sort, insert method, four corners. I mean, I'm not going to go over all of them, but I mean, it's just ways to help your kids make connection to make the content meaningful. The next one I would like to talk about, make sure it's is the third one, which is comprehensible input. So these reminders are for speech mostly. When teaching an ELL, you have to remember to do these things. You have to remember to talk slower. You have to remember to enunciate, to simplify your sentences, and avoid using idioms. I think a lot of us are guilty of that sometimes because it seems so normal for us to use these things, but we have to remember to be conscious of that and not do that. You also have to remember to model, repeat, and paraphrase. That is just like incredibly important, really just in teaching in general, but for ELL students especially, because they're looking for those cues to help figure out what's going on. Okay, the next one I would like to talk about is the strategies that you can use. Let's see, this ladder here says paraphrase, think aloud, reinforce, pronunciation, slow speech, and repeat. So the ladder represents verbal scaffolding techniques that are very useful when teaching any concept to ELLs. This is our strategies packet that we, as a class, came up with. And I've got all the strategies that my classmates came up with, as well as the ones that I came up with in here. We've got a vocabulary word map. I think a couple of us did that one. There's a vocabulary word sort here. Writing stories using these vocabulary words. There's all kinds of great scaffolding techniques to help sort of get these kids going when they may not really know how to start from scratch. So learning centers, that's a really great one. And these are all online as well. But I've got them all here listed. Vocabulary, role play, I really like that one. A graphic organizer and visual for that. This one is a KWL chart. I think a couple of us did this one as well. What you know, what you want to know, and what you learned. That's a really good way to help them make connections as well. And just scaffold that learning. Read, pair, share. Get the kids talking when speaking. A lot of times it's more, it's easier to talk with a fellow student than it is to talk like a whole group or with a teacher. So that's one good thing about that. So the fifth one here is up here. It's interaction. So this here says you need to give frequent opportunities for interactions, and underneath this little tab for interactions with the two kids talking is ways you can do that. So turn taking, encourage elaboration, balance student-teacher talk, and they're all in here. Meaningful language opportunities, active student participation, and this is just a way for you to go back and think of some ways, like how, when I'm planning my lesson, can I encourage interaction? I really want to do that in this lesson. So you go back to this indicator and you can get some ideas. Another way to do that is by carefully grouping your students. There's ways to group. You can vary and balance groups, so have different levels in your group. Provide background knowledge, guided instruction, foster collaboration. These are all ways to help do your grouping, engaging activities. Also, this clock here is to remind you to provide enough wait time for students to respond. This here says that you need to avoid constantly interrupting and correcting students. That's going to discourage them from participating in class in general. This here is to remind you to allow for additional time to complete tasks. And this one here, this little heart shape, is to remind you to be patient and understanding. It's probably very frustrating as an ELL student to be sitting in a class where you understand very little and you're trying to learn a language as well as content. So this can help you as a teacher to just remember all of those things to help make that easier on your ELL students. So this next one is practice and application. It's the sixth one. So these hands are supposed to represent interactive ways to incorporate activities that can apply content and language knowledge as well as integrate language skills. So all of these ways are ways that you can plan in your lesson. If you're planning your lesson, if I were a teacher planning my lesson, I could go back to this SIOP folder and say, well, how do I want to give my kids really good practice and help them apply the skill they just learned? Well, I can use hands-on games, or I can use manipulatives and movement, and I can kind of get an idea of where I want to go with my lesson and what I want to do to help them practice and apply the new knowledge. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is the number 7, which is the lesson delivery. This one is really important, and the cutouts are meant to remind you that both the content and language objectives need to be reviewed, displayed, as well as written in a student-friendly manner. And I think that's really easy to just brush over as a teacher. You just try to like jump into the content and you forget to kind of go over the objective. But it's also important to review the objective throughout the lesson. So you talk about it in the beginning, you refer back to it during the lesson, and then you talk about it in the end. Kind of help them really get that into their minds that that's what they're supposed to be learning. So the clocks, we've got allocated time. Wait, that's here. Allocated time, so the subjects and skills, that's how much time you're going to spend on it. Pace the lesson, so think about how long everything is going to take. Engage time and active participation, so this is when the kids are actively participated, and you want 90 to 100% of them to be actively participating. And then the academic learning and the tested material is here. So these are the things that, this is to remind you that you need to engage students in the academic learning, the allocated subject and skill time, but most of the lesson time, 90 to 100%, should include engaged time where students are actively participating in the learning process. And here are your objectives. These are meant to remind you as when you're planning your lesson that objectives need to be able to be assessed, they need to be measurable, and they need to be observable. You need to be able to see if the students are getting it or not. These shoes are to remind you that if kids are having a hard time catching up, to just slow down. If you see that students are just not with you, then you need to stop, or you need to go over something or check for understanding. It's never a bad idea to go and check for understanding and take a time out from what you were doing. It's not as important to just get through the lesson as it is to just like make sure everybody's getting it. So this little mini book here says ideas for lesson delivery. So these are kind of some interactive ways that you can engage your students in your lesson. So there's Think, Pair, Share, which is a really good one. Chunk and Chew. There's Roam and Review, Podcast, TV Talk Show. I like this one. So you can plan a talk show on a topic. One is the interviewer, guest, and expert. I thought that was fun. Writing headlines and e-journals or wiki. So these are all some ideas. So as a teacher, I could plan when I'm delivering my lesson. These are some ways that I can pace my lesson and just think about the student engagement in general. Okay, so this next one, the last one, I don't know if you can see it because of the glare, is the 8th SIOP indicator, which is the last one, review and assessment. So these little cloud cutouts here, as well as this one, the clouds are supposed to represent how you can review key vocabulary and wrap-up techniques, to review key concepts, such as like exit tickets or talking to your partner or writing in a journal. These are all ways to just kind of wrap up your lesson and assess what your kids have learned. You want to talk about the multiple meanings. You want to talk about the use of analogy, synonyms and antonyms, multiple exposures, and words indifferent. So these are wrap-up techniques. So this last part here, this little chart, it says informal assessment and creative formal assessment. So these are some ideas that you can use to assess your students formally and informally. So I could use this as a teacher if I can't figure out how to assess my kids, since every objective needs to be assessed. I can go to this list and I can say, oh, well, I can have them do make a shoebox diorama, or I can have them do a role play game, and how you assess your kids, it just depends on the way you want to do it. It doesn't always have to be formal, doesn't always have to be informal. Okay, so this last part here And this part's going to be kind of hard to show you. So here are the ELP strands. So there's the learning strategies strand, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So this is really useful to have, and I've actually used them a lot already. It's just good to have access to these whenever you're like looking to write a language objective. So these are the language objectives that you want your kids to know. And so you can look at these and kind of decide how you want to write your objective. This is kind of a good place to start after you've picked out your content objective. Because it's a cross-curricular introduction. Okay, so this next part, the ELPs and the TELPAS, this is just a good resource for ESL and bilingual teachers. So it's how you can tell where your kids are. I don't know if you can, there you go. How you can tell where your kids are. So are they beginning? Are they intermediate? Are they advanced? Are they advanced high? So, and there's, descriptions of each one of those in here for listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So that's a really good resource to have if you're trying to figure out where is this kid? Where is my ELL? So this here, capacity building series, this is another great resource that you can use when you're trying to form higher order thinking questions and how to concentrate on effective verbs in your objectives. So this is just, if you're having trouble with that, which I think is really tricky, so I would understand if you would have trouble. As a teacher, I can go back to this and I can be like, okay, well, this will help me ask my higher order questions. This is also a really good resource that you can use with your ELL students. It can help you with common classroom phrases, on some oral communication skills. There's just a wealth of things that you can use with your ELL students in this little packet here. This was just a tool for preparation. It was something I printed out for, I think, the first lesson preparation. Yes, and it kind of goes into more details, like on these different tabs. It has the hands-on, the pictures and visuals, multimedia, and these different, this sort of goes into bigger or greater detail of what these things are and how you can use them. So that was just to help me sort of remember, like, oh, well, that's what that is. And I just added that to my SIOP folder because I thought it would be helpful. And that is my SIOP resource folder. Thank you.